At first, no one thought it was dangerous. A bull moose stood at the edge of the forest with an old tire around his neck. Strange, yes, but he was still standing, still breathing. But the longer people watched, the clearer it became that something was very wrong. The tire wasn't just stuck. It had been there far too long. Every time the moose moved, the tire cut deeper. Every attempt to escape cost him strength, skin, and blood. No one knew how many days he had carried it. No one knew how long he had been suffering in silence. And when the truth was finally revealed, it shocked everyone, because the most disturbing part wasn't the tire itself. It was what it had been doing to him all along. The first thing Evan Miller noticed wasn't the animal's size. In northern Montana, you get used to big shapes moving through timber and meadow. What stopped him cold was the wrongness of the silhouette. A bull moose stood at the edge of Sawyer Creek's snowline, where the pines gave way to a narrow strip of open ground. The morning light was clean and hard, the kind that makes every branch look sharpened. Frost clung to the grass that hadn't been buried yet, and a thin crust of snow showed the night's wind had been busy. The bull should have looked like a moving wall-high shoulders, thick neck, a head that seemed built to push through anything. Instead, his neck was trapped inside a tire, not a small one either. A heavy, weathered truck tire hung around him like a black collar, low and tight, pressing into the dense fur. It shifted with each breath, and Evan could see where the rubber had rubbed the hair flat and dark. The moose's nostrils flared in harsh bursts. Every inhale sounded like work. Evan eased his pickup onto the shoulder and killed the engine. He didn't slam the door. He didn't even let it click shut. He stepped out slow and quiet, boots crunching softly, and kept his hands visible the way you do when you know you're the problem in someone else's world. The bull didn't bolt. That was the second wrong thing. Most moose in this country, especially a bull, want distance first. They'll give you a look-long, flat warning, and they'll move off with that stiff-legged stride that says they don't need you and they don't want you. This one only shifted his weight, ears flicking, head low. His eyes tracked Evan, not with curiosity, but with a tired, guarded focus, like he'd been chased too many times already. Evan raised his camera slowly and zoomed in from far back. Through the lens, the details hit harder. The tire wasn't just resting on fur. It was biting into the base of the neck where the skin folds when the animal lowers his head. There were raw patches where hair had been rubbed away, and along the underside Evan caught a thin line of red where the moose had scraped himself hard enough to break skin. The bull took 2 steps toward a spruce, then angled his head and drove the tire against the trunk. Rubber thumped wood. The moose pushed harder, twisting, trying to lever the tire up and off. For a moment, the tire climbed a fraction, then fell back with a heavy slap. The moose jerked, startled by his own failure, and did it again. The trunk was streaked with dampness, where the tire had smeared old grime and melting frost. The sound was wrong for the quiet morning. It carried. Evan's stomach tightened. He'd seen deer caught in fences before. He'd seen elk with old wire cutting into hide. Those were bad. This felt worse because it looked so simple, one stupid ring of rubber, and yet it had turned a bull moose into a creature trapped inside his own strength. Every time he shoved the tire into the tree, he spent energy he didn't have. Every time it slipped back, the edge dug in again. Evan took a slow step backward and stopped. He knew better than to get closer. A bull moose can cover distance faster than people think, and when they decide to come, there's no negotiating. Even worse, if this bull panicked and ran, the tire could snag a branch or a fence and flip him, or wrench his neck at full speed. The picture in Evan's mind wasn't dramatic. It was simple and final. The moose lowered his head, breathing hard. Steam rolled from his muzzle in thick bursts. His shoulders rose and fell. He stood like that for a long moment, as if waiting for the world to offer him another option. Evan's eyes moved over the snow around him, looking for clues. Tracks were everywhere, deep, wide prints that showed the moose had been here a while, pacing the same stretch of ground. The steps didn't form a straight line the way a healthy animal travels. They looped and doubled back, The bull had been making circles, returning to the same trees, the same posts, the same rough surfaces he could rub against. Trying, failing, trying again. Evan had the sudden, sick thought that this might not have started here at all. The tire could have been picked up miles away, caught when the moose pushed through a junk pile or a ditch where someone had dumped old rubber. Once it slid over his head, the thick base of his neck would keep it from coming off. As the moose ate and drank and moved, the tire would settle into the same spot day after day, compressing the fur, cutting circulation, turning a nuisance into a slow injury. Evan swallowed, then forced himself to stay calm. He kept filming, but he didn't chase the shot. He didn't need drama. The truth was already dramatic enough. A gust of wind moved through the creek bottoms and made the pines whisper. The bull lifted his head and stared past Evan toward the road. For a second, Evan thought someone else was coming. Then he realized it was just the moose's nerves scanning for threats, anything that might force him to run. When the bull turned slightly, sunlight caught the tire's sidewall. Evan saw cracks in the rubber, pale and spidering. This wasn't a tire from yesterday. It had been out in weather a long time. The thought landed heavy. If the tire had been rotting for years, it could have been sitting in some forgotten pile, waiting, until the day a bull moose put his head in the wrong place. Evan took one more step back, keeping the moose framed. He turned his phone on and dialed with his glove half off, fingers stiff from cold. The call went through on the second ring. "Fish and Wildlife," a woman answered, professional and flat. "This is Evan Miller," Evan said, keeping his voice low as if the moose could understand volume. "I'm off County Road 12 near Sawyer Creek. I've got a bull moose with a truck tire around his neck. It's tight. He's bleeding." There was a pause that told Evan the woman had shifted from routine to alert. "Stay back," she said immediately. "Do not approach. Is he near the road?" "Close," Evan said. "He's on the tree line. He's not running like he should. He looks worn out." "Any people around?" "Not yet." "Okay. I'm dispatching an officer now," the woman said. "Do not try to help him yourself. Keep your distance and, if you can, keep others away. Can you give me an exact location?" Evan described the turnoff, the old culvert, the stand of pines with a dead snag leaning left. As he spoke, his eyes never left the moose. The bull took another slow step and pressed the tire against the spruce again, harder this time. Evan saw his muscles bunch under the thick winter coat. The tire lifted, just barely, then snapped back down with a sound like a slap. The moose flinched and swung his head, and for a split second the edge of the tire rubbed the raw spot under his neck. A brighter bead of blood appeared, small but unmistakable against dark fur. Evan ended the call and stood still, feeling the cold in his fingers and the heat in his chest. This was the part people never understood when they saw a clip online later, the waiting. The helplessness of watching a wild animal fight a problem that didn't belong in its world, knowing your presence could make it worse, knowing time was doing damage with every breath. He kept filming, not for views, not for a story, but because evidence mattered. The right people would need to see what he saw, how tight it was, where the moose was standing, how close he was to the road, how little energy he had left. If this animal bolted toward town, it could end badly for everyone. The moose stopped fighting the tree and stood with his head low, his ears pivoted, catching sounds Evan couldn't hear. His eyes stayed on Evan, steady and unreadable, not pleading, not friendly. Just a wild animal, boxed in by pain and a piece of rubber, trying to decide whether the quiet human in the snow was another threat, or just another obstacle he didn't have the strength to deal with. Evan backed up another 10 yards and planted himself beside his truck, making sure he wasn't blocking the moose's path to the timber. He wanted the animal to feel there was always a way out, because if a moose feels trapped, it doesn't negotiate. It destroys whatever is in front of it. Across the creek, the pines stood dark and dense, an easy place to disappear. Evan had a sinking feeling that if the bull chose that darkness, no one would find him again, not in time. Somewhere down the road, far off, Evan thought he heard an engine. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He just kept watching the bull's breathing, the tire's slight shift with each exhale, and the thin red line that grew a fraction darker where rubber met flesh. The day had just begun, and already the margin for error felt razor thin. The first pickup slowed at the bend in the road not 10 minutes later. Evan noticed it before he heard it, the way the bull moose's ears tilted forward, then back, tracking the sound. Tires on cold pavement, a door opening. Voices muffled, curious, careless in the way people sound when they think they're about to see something unusual but harmless. The bull shifted his weight and lifted his head. The tire slid a fraction and settled again with a dull thud against his chest. His breathing picked up, faster now, sharper. Evan felt his own shoulders tighten in response. He raised one hand, palm out, toward the truck as it rolled closer. The driver leaned out, phone already in hand. "Hey," the man called, half smiling. "That thing's got a tire on it?" Evan didn't smile back. "You need to stop right there," he said. "Turn your engine off. Give him space." The man hesitated, then laughed like Evan was exaggerating. He eased the truck another few feet forward. The bull's head snapped up. His ears pinned back flat against his skull. For a heartbeat, Evan thought the moose was about to charge, not at the truck, not at Evan, but straight ahead, anywhere that wasn't here. "Stop," Evan said louder now. "You're too close." The driver finally cut the engine. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise had been. The bull stamped once, a sharp, heavy motion that sent a puff of snow up around his hooves. He swung his head, the tire knocking against his neck, and took a step toward the road. Evan felt the calculation happen in his chest before his mind caught up. If the moose broke into a run, he would hit pavement in seconds. County Road 12 wasn't a highway, but it carried logging trucks, ranch traffic, school buses. A bull moose at full speed with a tire around his neck wouldn't just be dangerous, he'd be uncontrollable. "Back up," Evan told the driver, his voice tight. "Slow, don't rev it." The truck rolled back a few feet. The bull stopped, his head lowered again, muscles along his shoulders rippling as he steadied himself. The tire creaked faintly as it shifted. More vehicles appeared at the bend. A woman in a compact SUV, a ranch hand in a flatbed. Word had traveled faster than Evan wanted. Phones came out, doors opened, people pointed. Evan moved closer to the road, putting himself where he could be seen, waving his arms low and wide. "Please," he said, trying to keep panic out of his voice. "This isn't safe. He's injured. You're stressing him." Some listened, some didn't. A man stepped out of his truck and took a few steps toward the ditch, angling for a better photo. The bull moose lifted his head again, eyes locking onto the movement. The air changed. Evan could feel it, the thin line between stillness and explosion. Then a white state truck pulled up fast and angled across the shoulder, blocking the lane. The door opened, and a woman in a dark jacket stepped out, already raising her voice. "Everyone back in your vehicles, now." Her tone wasn't loud, but it was final. It cut through the loose chatter and laughter like a blade. People froze, surprised, then began to comply when they saw the badge on her chest. The woman moved with purpose, eyes flicking from the moose to the road to the crowd and back again. She didn't rush toward the animal. She didn't run. She knew better. She stopped near Evan, keeping her body turned sideways, non-threatening. "I'm Lena Carter," she said quietly. "Fish and wildlife." Evan nodded, relief hitting him hard enough to make his knees feel weak. "He's been here a while," he said. "He's tired. The tire's cutting into his neck." "I can see that," Lena said. Her gaze never left the moose. "How close is the nearest house?" "Couple 100 yards that way," Evan said, nodding toward a low cluster of buildings half hidden by trees. "Barns, a shed. There's fencing." Lena's jaw tightened. "That's not good." She turned and walked back toward the road, raising her voice again. "I need everyone to leave. This is not a viewing area. If you stay, you're putting yourselves and this animal in danger." One man protested. "We're just watching." Lena fixed him with a look that finally did what Evans hadn't. "If he charges and someone gets hurt, this turns into a kill situation," she said flatly. Is that what you want?" That did it. Doors slammed. Engines turned over. Vehicles backed away and rolled on, slower now, subdued. When the road was mostly clear, Lena pulled out her radio and spoke in low, clipped sentences. Evan caught fragments: location, bull moose, tire collar, proximity to residences. She paused, listening, then spoke again, sharper this time. She came back to Evan and stood beside him, both of them keeping their distance from the bull. "He's too close to town," she said. "If he spooks and runs through those buildings, we lose control of the situation." "Can you move him?" Evan asked. Lena shook her head. "Not safely, not like this." She glanced at the tire again, at the way it sat low and unforgiving against the base of the moose's neck. "If we push him, he could hit a fence or get tangled, or he could turn on us." The bull took a few slow steps toward the barn line, nose low, scenting the air. Evan saw the muscles in his legs tremble with the effort. Lena keyed her radio again. "I need a large animal vet," she said. "Someone experienced with moose. We're going to need sedation." She listened, then nodded once. "I understand. We'll hold if we can." She turned back to Evan. "It's going to take time." Evan watched the bull stop and press the tire against a wooden post at the edge of a pasture fence. The post shuddered. The tire squealed faintly against old wood. The moose pushed harder, desperate now, and the post creaked but held. When the tire slipped back down, the bull staggered, catching himself at the last second. His breath came in ragged pulls. A darker smear appeared along the underside of the tire. Lena swore under her breath. "We can't let him keep doing that," Evan said. "I know," she replied, "but if we rush this, we make it worse." They stood there, two humans trying to manage a problem that never should have existed, watching a wild animal fight a piece of human waste with everything he had left. The town sat too close. The road hummed faintly in the distance. The margin for error felt smaller by the minute. Lena lowered her voice. "If he moves toward the buildings again," she said, "we may have to intervene sooner than I'd like." Evan nodded. He understood what she wasn't saying. The bull lifted his head from the fence post and turned back toward the trees, as if reconsidering. For a moment, the creek wind shifted and carried the smell of pine and cold earth toward him. He stood there, torn between cover and pain, between flight and exhaustion. Somewhere far off, sirens wailed briefly, then faded. Evan had the uneasy sense that this was only the beginning, that the hardest decisions were still coming, and that every one of them would carry a cost. By early afternoon, the cold had settled into a steady, biting presence. The sun hung low and pale behind thin clouds, offering light without warmth. An hour earlier, Evan had stopped feeling his toes. Lena noticed, but didn't comment. Everyone on scene was operating on the same quiet understanding. Comfort no longer mattered. The bull moose hadn't moved far. He paced the narrow strip between the trees and the pasture fence, tracing the same uneven path again and again. His tracks cut deep into the snow, overlapping, turning back on themselves. It was the movement of an animal that wanted out, but didn't know which direction wouldn't hurt more. Lena spoke into her radio and lowered it again. "The vet's still a couple of hours out," she said. "Road conditions." Evan exhaled slowly. "He doesn't have a couple of hours." "I know," Lena said. She watched the moose angle his head and rub the tire against a weathered fence post. The post shook. The tire squealed. When it slipped back, the moose flinched hard enough that his knees buckled for a moment. Lena made a decision she didn't like but couldn't avoid. "We're going to try to move him away from the buildings," she said. "Just a little. Keep him pointed toward the timber." "How?" Evan asked. "Pressure," she said. "Controlled, minimal." They spread out carefully, keeping a wide arc. No shouting, no sudden movements. Just bodies visible at a distance, enough to suggest a boundary without cornering him. It was a technique that worked on healthy animals. On this bull, it felt like gambling. For a moment, it seemed to work. The moose turned away from the barns and took a few steps toward the trees. Evan felt a flicker of hope. Then a pickup backfired. The sound cracked through the cold air like a rifle shot. The bull reacted instantly. His head snapped up, eyes wild now, fear cutting through exhaustion. He spun and bolted, not toward the open road, but sideways straight into the shallow drainage ditch that cut along the edge of the pasture. Evan shouted without meaning to. Lena swore. The moose stumbled as he hit the uneven ground. The tire swung and caught on a low, dead branch hidden beneath the snow. There was a sharp, tearing sound, not wood breaking, but something worse. The bull went down on one knee, then lurched back to his feet, dragging the branch with him for half a second before it snapped free. He staggered, sides heaving, and slammed the tire hard against the ditch bank as he tried to regain balance. When he came to a stop, the snow beneath his neck was stained dark. Evan felt his stomach drop. He didn't need binoculars to see what had happened. The edge of the tire had dug into the same raw patch again, tearing it wider. Blood seeped through the matted fur and dripped onto the snow in slow, heavy drops. The moose stood there, shaking, head low, breath coming in broken pulls. He didn't charge. He didn't run. He just stood, as if his body had reached a limit his will couldn't push past. Lena raised her hand and motioned everyone back. "That's it," she said. Her voice was tight, controlled. "No more pushing." They retreated, giving the bull space. The silence that followed was thick and awful. Even the wind seemed to pause. Evan watched the moose take a tentative step, then another, limping slightly now. Each movement made the tire shift, and each shift brought a fresh twitch of pain. The animal angled toward the trees again, slower this time, more cautious, as if afraid of his own momentum. "This is on us," Evan said quietly. Lena nodded. "Every bad outcome from here on is on us if we rush." She keyed her radio again, urgency creeping into her tone. "We had a complication," she said. "He's bleeding more now. We need that vet as soon as possible." The response crackled back, indistinct but firm. There was no faster option. Lena lowered the radio and stared at the moose. "If he goes down out there," she said, "we might not get another chance." Evan followed her gaze. The timberline wasn't far, but it was dense. If the bull made it into that cover and collapsed, he'd be invisible within yards. No clear shot, no safe access, just trees and a wounded animal too strong to handle without sedation. The moose reached the edge of the trees and stopped. He pressed the tire against the rough bark of a pine and leaned into it, harder than before. The bark scraped away. Sap smeared the rubber. The bull pushed until his legs trembled. Then the tire slipped again. The moose let out a low, broken sound. Not a call, not a challenge, but something closer to frustration, maybe even pain. He backed away from the tree and stood there, sides heaving, head hanging. Evan realized he was holding his breath. Lena took a step toward him, then stopped herself. She knew the line. Cross it, and instinct would take over. The bull didn't need another reason to panic. They waited. Minutes stretched thin. The cold worked its way deeper into Evan's hands, but he barely noticed. All he could see was the blood darkening the snow, the way the bull's movements had lost their edge. "This can't happen again," Evan said. "It won't," Lena replied. "Next move is sedation. No half measures." They both knew the risk. A sedated moose in the wrong place could suffocate. He could slide downhill. He could wake too fast or too slow. But after what they'd just seen, the alternative was worse. The bull lifted his head and looked back toward the open ground, then toward the barns, then into the trees. He seemed caught between bad choices, his world narrowed by pain in a circle of rubber he couldn't escape. Evan felt a heavy certainty settle in his chest. The easy part of this was over. Whatever happened next would decide whether this animal walked away or disappeared into the timber to die where no one could help him, and the clock was still ticking. By late afternoon, the light began to thin and stretch, losing its warmth and turning flat and gray. Shadows pooled early along the tree line, and the air carried that quiet warning that comes before night in the mountains. Time had stopped feeling measured in hours. It moved now in smaller units, breaths, steps, decisions. The bull moose had edged deeper toward the timber, but refused to disappear into it. He stayed close to the boundary, pacing a narrow corridor where the trees thinned and the ground sloped unevenly. It was as if he wanted cover without committing to it, afraid that once he crossed that line, there would be no coming back. Lena noticed it too. "He won't go in," she said quietly. "Not all the way." "Why?" Evan asked. "Because he knows he's compromised," she replied. "Out there, he can't see what's coming." The moose lowered his head and dragged the tire along the frozen ground, carving a shallow groove through snow and dirt. The sound was dull and steady, like something being pulled that didn't want to move. Each step looked heavier than the last. His gait had changed, subtle but unmistakable. One hind leg favored the other now, fatigue settling into his joints. As the light faded, other signs began to surface. Evan was the first to notice the tracks. They weren't fresh enough to gleam, but they were sharp at the edges, not yet softened by wind. Smaller than the moose's, lighter, traveling in a loose line that paralleled his path at a distance. "Lena," Evan said, nodding toward the snow near the trees. She crouched carefully, keeping her movement slow. She studied the prints, then straightened, her mouth set in a thin line. "Coyotes," she said. "Maybe a small wolf pair. Hard to say." "They're close?" "Close enough to know he's hurt." The bull lifted his head suddenly, ears rotating, catching something neither human could hear. He froze, muscles tensing beneath his coat. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, a massive shape etched against the darkening trees, the tire hanging like an accusation around his neck. Then he took 2 short steps forward and stopped again. "He can't afford to run," Evan said. "And they know that," Lena replied. The predators didn't show themselves. They didn't need to. Their presence lived in the silence between sounds, in the way the moose's posture changed, head lower, body angled to protect his flank, attention split between pain and threat. Even injured, he was still dangerous. But danger didn't equal safety. Lena keyed her radio and spoke in low tones, requesting updates, stressing urgency. The response crackled back, still frustratingly distant. The vet was coming, just not yet. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the creek and wet earth. Somewhere deeper in the timber, a single sharp yip cut the air, then went quiet again. Evan felt the hair on his arms rise beneath his jacket. The bull moose took a step back toward the open ground, away from the trees. He stopped near a cluster of young pines and leaned into one, pressing the tire hard against the trunk. The bark scraped away in strips. Sap oozed, sticky and pale. He pushed until his legs trembled, then recoiled when the tire slid back and bit into his neck. Blood spotted the snow again. Lena swore softly. "He's tearing himself up." Evan didn't answer. He was watching the tree line, the way the shadows seemed to deepen in pockets. He knew enough about predators to understand the math unfolding. They wouldn't rush him. They'd wait. Let exhaustion do the work. The moose stood panting, sides heaving, then turned his head slowly toward the sound he'd heard earlier. His eyes were dark now, wide, reflecting the low light. For the first time since Evan had arrived, there was something unmistakable there. Fear. Not the sharp, explosive fear that sends an animal running, but the heavy, calculating kind, the kind that weighs options and finds none of them good. "If he stays here overnight," Evan said, "he won't make it." Lena nodded. "I know." She stepped a few paces away and spoke into her radio again, more force in her voice now. When she finished, she stood with her hands on her hips, staring at the bull. "We may have to sedate him at first light if the vet doesn't get here before dark," she said, "but doing it in low light is dangerous." "And letting him go into the timber is worse," Evan said. "Yes," Lena agreed, "much worse." The bull shifted again, circling back toward the same battered trees, trapped in a loop of pain and instinct. The tire knocked softly against his chest with each step, a steady reminder that he wasn't free to move the way he needed to. Another sound drifted from the woods, lower this time, more distant. The moose reacted anyway, stamping once, hard, sending a spray of snow into the air. He backed away from the trees and stood in the open, exposed but defiant, chest heaving. He was choosing visibility over cover, risk over certainty. Lena took a slow breath. "He's running out of options," she said. "So are we," Evan replied. They stood together in the fading light, watching the edge of the forest and the wounded animal caught between it and the town behind them. The day was slipping away, and with it the margin they'd been trying to protect. Night was coming, and whatever happened next would have to happen soon. The sound of tires on gravel came just as the last light began to drain from the valley. Evan heard it first, low and steady, not rushed. He turned and saw the headlights easing down the road, careful, deliberate. The truck rolled to a stop well back from the scene, engine idling softly before cutting off. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of calm that came from years of working around animals that could kill him without meaning to. Dr. Mark Holloway didn't hurry. He took in the whole picture before he took a single step forward. The moose's position, the tree line, the fence, the road, the people. His eyes lingered on the tire, then on the darkened snow beneath the bull's neck. "How long has he been bleeding?" he asked. "On and off for hours," Lena said. "It got worse after he snagged the tire." Mark nodded once. "Then we don't have much time." He opened the back of his truck and began laying out equipment with practiced efficiency. There was no drama in his movements, no wasted motion. Evan noticed how he kept his voice low, how he never turned his back fully on the moose. The bull stood in the open now, chest heaving, head low. He watched the new arrival without charging, without retreating. His energy had thinned to a narrow band enough to stay upright, not enough to fight everything anymore. Mark studied the wind, tossing a pinch of powder into the air and watching how it drifted. He frowned, then waited, counting seconds until it shifted again. "We get one clean shot," he said quietly. "If he bolts after the dart hits, we could lose him. If he goes down wrong, we could lose him. There is no second try." Lena nodded. "What do you need?" "Space," Mark said, "and silence." They backed everyone farther away, even Evan. It went against his instinct, but he understood. Too many bodies, too much tension, and the moose might break. Mark raised the dart rifle slowly and rested it against his shoulder. He didn't aim right away. He waited. He watched the bull's breathing, the rise and fall of muscle beneath fur, the slight sway as fatigue tugged at him. The moose turned his head toward the trees, ears flicking. For a moment, Evan thought he might make a run for it. His heart hammered as the bull shifted his weight, hooves crunching softly in the snow. "Now," Lena whispered, barely audible. Mark didn't move. He waited until the bull settled again, until his stance widened just enough to suggest he wasn't about to spring. Then, and only then, Mark squeezed the trigger. The sound was sharp but brief. The dart struck high in the shoulder with a muted thud. The bull reacted instantly, jerking in surprise. He took 2 stumbling steps, then 3, swinging his head wildly. The tire knocked against his chest, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. Evan's breath caught. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment things went wrong. But the drug worked fast. The bull's steps shortened. His legs stiffened, then wobbled. He tried to correct, to power through it the way moose do, sheer mass forcing balance back into place. He made it 2 more steps before his knees buckled. He went down hard, the ground shuddering beneath him. "Head and airway," Mark said sharply. They moved in fast, but controlled, a practiced dance. Mark knelt near the bull's massive head, adjusting its position so the airway stayed clear. Lena watched the chest, counting breaths, calling out the rhythm. The moose's eyes were still open, glassy now, unfocused. His breathing was heavy but steady. "Good," Mark said. "We've got a window, not long." They didn't waste a second. Mark took a knife and went straight to the tire. Up close, the damage was worse than Evan had imagined. The rubber was worn thin in places, cracked and brittle. It had molded itself to the shape of the moose's neck, pressed into flesh that had lost its natural contour. As the blade bit into the rubber, a sour, stale smell rose into the air. The tire gave way with a final, reluctant snap. They lifted it off together, straining under its weight. When it cleared the bull's neck, there was a moment of stunned silence. Under the tire, the fur was gone in a wide band. The skin beneath was raw, angry, and uneven, with patches that looked wrong in a way Evan couldn't immediately name. Old damage, new damage, layers of suffering stacked on top of each other. Mark swore quietly. Lena closed her eyes for a brief second before forcing herself to look again. "This didn't happen in a week," Mark said. Evan felt a cold realization settle in his chest. Whatever they thought they were dealing with, it was bigger than that. But there was no time to absorb it. The moose shifted slightly, a low sound rumbling in his chest as the drug held him in that narrow space between unconsciousness and waking. "Work fast," Mark said. They cleaned what they could, treated what they could, knowing it wasn't enough, but that it was something. Mark checked the bull's vitals again, then glanced at the sky, now fully dark. "He's going to wake up soon," he said. "When he does, he needs room." They backed away, carrying the tire with them like evidence of a crime. Evan watched as they set it down in the snow, a heavy, lifeless thing that had nearly killed a living giant. The bull moose lay still for a moment longer, chest rising and falling. Then one eye blinked. A leg twitched. Everyone stepped back. Evan held his breath, knowing the next few seconds would decide everything. Up close, the truth was impossible to soften. With the tire removed, the bull moose's neck no longer looked like part of a living animal. The wide band of missing fur revealed skin that had been rubbed raw and reshaped by pressure over time. It wasn't a single wound. It was a record weeks, maybe months, written into flesh. Mark leaned in, careful with his hands, his movements precise. He pressed gently along the edges of the damaged area, watching how the tissue responded. In some places, the skin was inflamed and angry red. In others, it had gone pale and dull, thickened in a way that made his jaw tighten. "This isn't just abrasion," he said quietly. "There's necrosis starting here. See the edges?" Lena nodded, her expression hard. "How long?" Mark didn't answer right away. He adjusted the bull's head slightly, keeping the airway clear, then took another look. "Long enough that this tire became part of his daily life," he said. "Long enough that his body started adapting to the damage." Evan stood a few steps back, the cold forgotten. He stared at the exposed skin, trying to reconcile it with the animal he'd first seen that morning. Standing, breathing, still fighting. The idea that the moose had been carrying this pain for so long, moving through the forest with every step grinding rubber into flesh, made his chest ache. Mark pointed to a faint, uneven groove in the skin near the base of the neck. "This cut isn't fresh," he said. "It's partially healed." Then it was reopened, more than once. Lena looked up sharply. "You're saying someone tried to take it off before?" Mark nodded. "At least once, maybe more. See the angle? That's not from a tree. That's a blade." The words landed heavy. Evan pictured the bull weeks earlier, stronger, less desperate, stumbling across a human who had tried to help without the tools or training to finish the job. A cut made in panic. A failure that left the tire in place and the animal bleeding, then forced to live with the consequences. "Jesus," Lena said softly. They worked quickly but carefully. Mark flushed the wound, cleaned away debris, applied medication meant to slow infection and give the tissue a chance to recover. It wasn't a cure. Everyone knew that. It was a stopgap, a way to give the bull a fighting chance once he was back on his feet. The moose shifted again, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. His eyelids fluttered. The sedation was wearing off. "How much time?" Lena asked. "Minutes," Mark said. "Maybe less." They stepped back, creating distance, giving the animal space to wake without feeling surrounded. The tire lay off to the side, black and misshapen, its inner edge smeared with blood and sap. In the harsh light of a headlamp, it looked smaller than it had on the mooseless powerful, less significant. Evan felt a flash of anger at the simplicity of it. All this suffering from something so easily discarded. The bull's legs twitched. His chest expanded in a deep, shuddering breath. One massive shoulder rolled as he tried to gather himself. "Easy," Mark murmured, though he knew the animal couldn't understand him. "Just stand up when you're ready." The moose lifted his head, confusion clouding his eyes. For a second, panic flickered, then settled into something else. He tested his weight, shifting carefully, as if expecting pain that didn't come the way it had before. He pushed himself up in stages, first onto his chest, then onto his knees. Snow sprayed as his hooves dug in. His legs trembled under his own mass, but they held. When he finally stood, fully upright, the difference was immediate. His head lifted higher than it had all day. Not much, but enough. He turned his neck slowly, cautiously, as if bracing for the familiar bite of rubber. It wasn't there. The bull stood still, breathing hard, steam rolling from his nostrils. The forest was silent around him. No engines, no voices, just the wind and the faint creak of trees. Then he did something no one expected. He turned his head toward them, not in challenge, not in fear. He looked at them the way a wild animal looks when it's taking stock measuring distance, reading posture, deciding what matters. His eyes were dark and steady, old eyes that had learned pain the hard way. For several seconds, no one moved. Evan felt the weight of that look settle on him, heavy and humbling. This wasn't gratitude. It wasn't understanding. It was recognition of presence, of change, of the absence of something that had been hurting him for a very long time. The bull snorted softly, once. Then he turned away. He took a step toward the trees. Then another. His gait was uneven but freer, his neck no longer forced into an unnatural angle. Each step carried him farther from the open ground, farther from the road, farther from the tire lying useless in the snow. They watched until his broad back disappeared into the darkness of the timber. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Lena exhaled. "I didn't expect that," she said. "Neither did I," Mark replied. Evan kept his eyes on the trees, listening to the forest reclaim its silence. The bull was gone, carrying his wounds with him, but not the weight that had nearly killed him. What remained was the tire, stained and still, and the uneasy knowledge of how close they had come to being too late. For several minutes after the bull vanished into the timber, no one moved. The forest swallowed sound the way it always did after a disturbance, slowly, deliberately, as if closing a door. Evan strained to hear something, anything. A crashing retreat, snapping branches, the heavy rhythm of flight. None came. There was only the faint hiss of wind through needles and the distant rush of Sawyer Creek. "That's not how this usually goes," Lena said at last. Mark didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the tree line, head slightly tilted, listening with the focus of someone who'd learned to trust quiet signs over noise. "He's moving," he said finally. "Just not running." They waited longer than felt necessary, longer than protocol required. It wasn't caution keeping them there. It was something closer to respect. Evan's breath fogged the air as he replayed the moment in his mind, the way the bull had turned his head, the stillness in his eyes, the absence of panic. He'd photographed wildlife for years, had seen animals pause before bolting, before charging, before vanishing. This hadn't been that. This had been different. The bull had stood up like someone testing a long, injured limb, bracing for pain that didn't arrive the way it used to. Lena finally broke away and walked over to where the tire lay in the snow. She nudged it with the toe of her boot. It rolled half a turn and stopped, lifeless. In the beam of a flashlight, the inside edge told its story. Polished smooth in places, jagged in others, darkened by old blood and sap. "He carried this for a long time," she said. "Too long," Mark replied. Evan lifted his camera but didn't take a photo. It felt wrong now, like documenting an aftermath that didn't need proof. Some moments existed better without witnesses. They began packing up in silence. Mark secured his equipment. Lena made a final radio call, her voice lower than before, reporting the outcome without embellishment. The bull was free. He had moved into the timber under his own power. Follow-up would come later. As the scene emptied, the cold crept back in. Evan stamped his feet, feeling pins and needles flare as circulation returned. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day ebbed, leaving behind a dull ache and a fatigue that settled into his bones. "Do you think he'll make it?" Evan asked. Lena didn't pretend certainty. "I think he has a chance," she said, "more than he did this morning." They stood for a while longer, scanning the trees with headlamps, careful not to push light too deep. Somewhere out there, the bull was choosing a bed, perhaps close, perhaps already farther than they imagined. He would lie down carefully tonight. He would feel the wound without the pressure that had shaped it. His body would begin a different argument with pain. Evan wondered what it was like for the bull in that first minute alone. The sudden absence of weight, the unfamiliar freedom of turning his neck without resistance, the quiet after days or weeks of constant friction. A sound drifted back from the timber then, low and brief. Not a call, not alarm, just the sound of a large animal shifting through brush, controlled and deliberate. Mark nodded to himself. "That's good," he said softly. They loaded the tire into the bed of Lena's truck. It landed with a hollow thump and rolled until it hit the side, leaving a dark smear behind. Evan looked at it once more and felt the anger return. Not hot, not sharp, but steady. All of this, because someone had left it where it didn't belong. The headlights came on. Engines started. The small circle of light and human noise pulled back from the edge of the forest and thinned into the night. As they drove away, Evan glanced in the side mirror. For a split second, he thought he saw movement between the trees, a broad shape pausing, then continuing deeper into shadow. It might have been nothing, a trick of light, or it might have been the bull, already choosing distance over memory. Evan didn't slow to look again. Some stories didn't need confirmation to be real. Some moments stood on their own, complete in the way they changed everyone who witnessed them. Behind them, the forest closed. Ahead, the road unwound toward town. And somewhere in between, a bull moose moved forward without the weight that had nearly ended him, carrying scars, carrying pain, but carrying himself, at last, on his own terms. The next morning came in soft and gray, the kind of winter light that makes the world feel muted and honest. Overnight, a thin layer of snow had fallen, just enough to smooth the old tracks and leave the ground looking newly swept. It also meant that if the bull moose had moved, the valley would show it. Lena Carter was back at Sawyer Creek before most people in town poured their first cup of coffee. She parked well short of the tree line and stepped out into the cold without slamming the door. No sirens, no radio chatter, just boots in snow and a slow scan of the place where the day before had nearly gone wrong. Evan came too. He hadn't planned on it, but sleep had been useless. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the tire lifting and slapping back down, heard the backfire, saw the dark stains spreading in the snow. He needed to know how the story ended, even if the ending was nothing more than tracks. They walked together, stopping often, reading the ground like a page. The first sign was close to where the bull had stood after waking. A heavy print, deep and clean-edged, pressed into the new snow. Then another, and another, moving in a straight, purposeful line toward the timber. "He didn't circle," Evan said quietly. Lena crouched and ran a gloved hand along the track's edge. "No," she agreed, "he's traveling." They followed at a respectful distance, not trying to close the gap, not trying to push into places where they didn't belong. The tracks crossed a narrow drainage and climbed a gentle slope. They angled away from the barns, away from the road. The stride lengthened, the path steadied. Halfway up, Lena stopped and pointed. Near the tracks was a patch of disturbed snow with small scattered marks around it, the kind left by hooves shifting in place. The bull had stood there for a moment, maybe to rest, maybe to listen, then moved on. There was no sign of collapse, no sign of a struggle. Evan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "He made it through the night," Lena said. "That's something," Evan replied. "It's a lot," she said, and her voice softened in a way Evan hadn't heard the day before. They didn't follow the tracks all the way into the deepest timber. Lena knew better. If the bull was bedding down somewhere, the last thing he needed was a human presence pressing into his space. The point of a rescue wasn't to turn a wild animal into a neighbor. It was to remove the thing that never should have been there and let nature take back over. They turned back toward the road. That's when Lena's eyes caught on something near the pasture fence, a line of old ruts leading off through a stand of scrub and into a shallow depression behind the barns. She studied it, then looked at Evan. "Yesterday he kept drifting this way," she said. "There's a reason." They followed the ruts, stepping carefully over broken ice and hard-packed snow. The depression opened into a small, ugly clearing hidden from the road by trees and a rise in the land. It wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. It was a dumping spot. Old appliance parts half buried in dirt, a cracked plastic barrel, rusted metal, and tires, more than Evan expected. Some were passenger tires. Some were heavy truck tires like the one they'd cut off the moose. They were scattered like black rings against the snow, some stacked, some collapsed, some half hidden in weeds. The Evans stopped and just stared. Lena's face tightened. "This isn't an accident," she said. "Not in the sense of bad luck. Not in the sense of one wrong tire in one wrong place. This is a trap waiting for something to stick its head through." Mark Holloway arrived a short time later, called in when Lena reported what they'd found. He walked the edge of the clearing, scanning the tires the way he'd scanned the bull's neck. "Animals push through these piles," he said. "They're curious. They smell salt, old grease, whatever soaked in. A calf, a young bull, even a deer. Once that tire slides over the head and hits the neck, it becomes a collar, and collars don't come off on their own." Evan felt sick. The story they'd lived yesterday suddenly widened. It wasn't just one bull moose and one tire. It was a pattern. A quiet, careless habit that turned into suffering far from anyone's eyes. Lena pulled out her phone and began taking photos, not for social media, not for attention, but for evidence. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "I'm reporting this," she said, "and we're getting this cleaned up." Evan looked at the tire they'd removed, still in the bed of Lena's truck. In daylight, it looked even more ordinary. It could have been any tire on any back road in America. That was the problem. They spent the rest of the morning making calls. County services, a local rancher with equipment, a volunteer group that handled cleanup when state resources ran thin. Lena did what she always did, turned frustration into action. Evan helped where he could. He spoke to the rancher, explained what had happened without turning it into a spectacle. The man listened, jaw set, and nodded once. "I'll bring a trailer," he said. "We'll haul it all out." By afternoon, machinery rumbled into the clearing. Chains clinked, tires were lifted and stacked and dragged away. The ugly little dump site began to empty, the ground underneath it finally exposed. Evan stood at the edge and watched, the cold wind on his face. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt sober. Lena walked up beside him. "People think the woods eat everything," she said, "that if you toss something out there, it disappears." "It doesn't," Evan replied. "No," she said, "it waits." Late in the day, when the last load of tires rolled out, Lena and Evan walked back toward the tree line one more time. Not to search, not to chase, just to stand where the bull had stood and look into the timber with a little less helplessness than before. They didn't see him. They weren't supposed to. But they saw fresh tracks, deep, clean, headed away from town. A line that didn't wobble or circle. A line that said the animal was still moving, still choosing distance, still alive. Evan lifted his camera and took one final photo not of the moose, but of the empty snow where the tire had been. A blank space where something harmful had been removed. Sometimes that was the best ending you got. On the drive back, Lena's truck carried the tire like a piece of proof, and the valley carried the silence again. The forest had returned to itself, and somewhere inside it, a bull moose was traveling with less pain than he'd had the day before. The story didn't end with gratitude. Wild animals don't owe people that. It ended with something quieter and harder to earn a chance, and with a reminder that the most dangerous traps are the ones no one means to set. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to hear from you. If you believe the moose deserved a second chance, type 1 in the comments. If this story made you think differently about how human actions affect wildlife, type 0. You don't need to explain anything. Just let your number be your voice. And if you want to keep watching true-to-life stories like this, stories about animals, consequences, and the moments that quietly change us, consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories ahead. Some are difficult. Some are hopeful. All of them matter. Thank you for watching.